to the April IBM CDO and CTO Summit, the second in our six-part series for 2021. I'm Timothy Humphrey, a leader in IBM's Chief Data Office, and I'm excited to kick off today's sessions. These unprecedented times make it more important than ever for data and technology leaders to work together to lead teams and serve clients. In the recently released IBM CEO study, 63% of outperformers identified partnerships across the C-suite as an essential advantage to fuel innovation. How you lead and invest in your partnerships today will set your organization up for success in the future. Today, first, we will hear from Inderpal Bhandari, IBM's Global Chief Data Officer. Then we will hear from a panel of 4 truly outstanding data and technology thought leaders who will share how they are leading, partnering, and transforming their organizations. I've been a part of IBM's CDO Summit since they were face-to-face events. Remember those? Together, we have built a community of more than 1,000 data and technology leaders. And every time we get together, even now virtually, I gain new and valuable insights from this extraordinary group of thought leaders. I'm sure that today's session will be no different. Thank you again for joining. Let's get started.
Thank you for that overview and kind introduction, Tim. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Long Beach, CDO Club World Headquarters. Another beautiful day. It's great to see you all again. We're excited to bring you episode 2 of the IBM CDOs CTO Summit Series. I'm David Matheson, founder and CEO of the CDO Club and CDO Summit. I want to thank you all for participating. We've received a lot of great questions, and we'll be getting to them later on today. But first, I'm thrilled to reintroduce and bring back to the show IBM's Global Chief Data Officer, Inderpal Bhandari. Welcome back. Great to see you again, Inderpal.
Great to be here, Dave.
Inderpal, as I mentioned, as you know, we've received a lot of great questions from viewers, and they kind of stacked up. So we've bundled a few of those into 3 key areas, and I'd just love to hear your thoughts on some of these, and I know our audience is dying to hear from you as well. So for the first question, you were one of the first people to ever hold the title of Chief Data Officer. And what advice do you have for new CDOs coming into the profession in the midst of a global pandemic?
And you know this well, Dave. I by now I have it down to a craft, right? So I have the 5 activities that one does when one starts this job on day one. I'll just use 2 or 3 of those that are super critical and add some color situationally based on where we are today. Having been through the pandemic and so forth. One aspect is, of course, around data strategy. And data strategy has to do with understanding the business strategy, so you can tie the data strategy to enable the business strategy. But it's a really, really important piece of the puzzle. Without getting into the specifics of a particular business, because the business strategies will be very different for different companies, and consequently, the data strategies will, CDOs should understand where the revenue is going to come from for their company.
Yeah.
Also, what can the CDO themselves do to influence that revenue? I think the other aspect that's critical from a CDO's role is the relationships that one has to manage across the enterprise.
Definitely.
And again, there I have a tip that I'd like to pass on. I like to think about that as fostering trust. And the trust is, it takes on different flavors depending on who you're trying to foster trust with. So for example, if it's a business unit head, they are deeply interested in listening to you if they think you're going to actually accelerate their strategy.
Right.
So that's why the revenue question, that I mentioned earlier. Sure. If it's the CTO or the CIO, who essentially are co-implementers with you, there the trust is that, are you really going to play nice in the sandbox? And so it's different for the different parties that are involved. But you have to essentially solve for trust across the entire enterprise to be able to pull that off. And then the third piece, which is extremely important, is talent, being able to attract it, acquire it, nurture it. And the tip that I'll pass on that one is, based on where we are today, having been through an year of the pandemic, I can guarantee you that the workforce feels differently about work than they did 1 year back, before COVID-19. So I
Absolutely.
think it behooves the leader to really have an understanding of what that changed mindset is so that they're able to shepherd and manage that talent as they move forward. So those, I think, would be kind of the three pieces of advice that I would pass on.
That's great, Inderpal. And certainly the last two items, your relation, the CDO's relationship with the C-suite and their peers. The interesting thing is that stuff happens a year before that person ever joins, because it all starts with the job description. The job description before that person even joins usually has to be approved by the C-suite and sometimes the board. And by the time this person lands, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? So some of those priorities may have shifted. It really means the whole C-suite has to be very flexible.
And there's another, so you raised another really good point, which is another device that I use in terms of actually managing this stuff, is I do think the CDO should establish a clear baseline of where they are at, so that they can then use that in the form of a scorecard, in terms of monthly updates. Again, not just to their management, but also to their peers. But without understanding what the baseline is, the accomplishment won't be as cogent to people.
Absolutely. Yeah, and back to the job description too, you really do need the board, and whoever writes that JD needs to be very clear about the roles and responsibilities of every member of the C-suite, so that that new person isn't seen as a threat or a conflict, that they're seen as a peer and someone who can help them achieve the goals. So number two, given the global pandemic, what opportunities have you been seeing for enterprise digital transformation?
Yeah, so I think the biggest shift has been in terms of the receptivity of senior management in enterprises to actually go ahead and do digital transformation. And we have an Institute of Business Value at IBM that does all kinds of research and work and publishes it. And when we look at the work that they've done, the overwhelming majority of the people they survey post the start of COVID-19, the answers that they're getting now from that audience is that the barriers to digital transformation have effectively vanished.
Definitely.
As everybody realizes that, just because of the hybrid workplace and so forth that we are into now, everybody also realizes that's how it's going to stay.
Yep.
And the importance of making sure that it's not just the employees, but also your clients and customers are going to deal with you in a hybrid way. So that whole experience has to be really good. They have all converged on the fact that the digital transformation is now key, and it's got to be at the helm of everything that they do. So those barriers have vanished, a tremendous opportunity. I also think that they've honed in on the two major pieces of technology, cloud and AI, to essentially accelerate, spur that digital transformation. And on the cloud side is primarily in terms of performance impact, so that you can actually do things much faster, much quicker, also make things more resilient and so forth. But it's a performance impact. While on the AI side, using AI to transform the customer experience has been very big. So I think those are the major opportunities post-pandemic, or even while the pandemic is on, that in the world that we find ourselves in today, that we can leverage and exploit.
Final question. What are some key operational focus areas that CDOs and CTOs should concentrate on when navigating the risks and opportunities of the coming year?
I think in terms of operational areas to focus on, agility, effectiveness, resilience, using the cloud to do that, specifically for ID operations, data ops, ML ops, AI ops. There's a key aspect there to focus on and to drive performance impact. I think the other area I also mentioned was using AI in the realm of customer engagement and customer experience to make sure that that gets elevated. I think using AI in the context of the supply chain to mitigate risk and to manage the supply chain, I think is a huge opportunity. In terms of workforce, there is the opportunity to actually, the data that you have from your internal operations, but also to augment that with external data, so that you truly get an understanding of the picture of talent as it exists outside your organization, as it exists within, to improve your talent mix. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about cybersecurity and privacy, compliance and regulations and so forth. I think that's going to be a huge opportunity. Just, by way of example, I mean, as part of the Global Chief Data Office within IBM, we did have that heritage because we managed the GDPR effort within IBM. But then what we learned there was that a lot of the work had to be done manually. And so now we're really developing a unified platform, automated platform, to be able to manage that, which basically means you then end up providing a much more consistent implementation of compliance across the board, not only across all the thousands of data sources that we have and the hundreds of legal entities that we have, but also done in a way that you're going to basically bridge over to the hundreds of thousands of suppliers and vendors that one must manage, which was a very heavy lift when we did GDPR. And then you kind of also couple that with the experience on the consumer side, because consumers are increasingly going to get more and more interested in what data you have about them and how you're using it. And you have to be able to satisfy all those queries rapidly. And so that whole thing has to be automated and done in a way that it fosters trust and is totally transparent, right? And so you have to put all that stuff together. So I think that's a huge opportunity within the realm of which broadly I'm clubbing it all under privacy, cybersecurity, compliance today.
Absolutely. Well, another great session, Inderpal. We really appreciate it. And now we're going to hear from our panelists on the topic of how CDOs and CTOs are leading during turbulent times. Thanks again, Inderpal.
Thank you, Dave.
We're really excited to continue our program with our guest panelists. So first questions for everybody. It's a speed round. What's the one thing that changed due to the pandemic that you would all like to see continue?
The change that I really saw was the closer cooperation, collaboration with the business. Typically, the business has always had kind of this, they and us mentality. And what you saw last year, which was really in my mind, which was very impactful, was a lot more unity working together to solve problems.
Well, I definitely love the flexibility that the pandemic has brought to multiple fronts. Definitely able to spend a lot of time with family, much quality time. I don't think I'd ever get a chance in future until retirement by the time they'd be grown up, but definitely the flexibility and the difference between, there used to be a lot of difference when it comes to larger organizations between somebody's working remote versus somebody on site. I think that's all gone now. We're able to all deliver the same value. Everybody's getting treated. It's more inclusive environment right now.
There's been sort of two things. I think one, there's an appetite to source talent that's not just based in your city. I think for those of us who are in this industry, it's always been very normal for us to have offshore, onshore teams and have other resourcing models. And so being on video conferences is very normal and natural for us, but it hasn't been for the business because that face-to-face interaction is just so critical and crucial. And so oftentimes when I wanted to build a team or expand a team, there was always the question of, well, they have to be based in the city. And I said, some of my best talent aren't in New York City or in Los Angeles or in Washington or in Miami. We should be able to source nationally because as long as they have the aptitude and the work ethic to be where they need to be, when they need to be, it doesn't matter where they live technically. And that was always a challenge and a struggle. But I think post-COVID, everyone's like, oh, wait, this really does work. This can work. And we're like, genius idea. This is amazing. So I think now there's increased tolerance and propensity for hybrid working models and sourcing talent outside of the city you're in. That's the first trend. I think the second is it's just been magnificent seeing companies who have really leaned in during the pandemic and full throttle all investments in the DNA space, digital, tech, AI, everything, and others who've gotten a bit squeamish and sort of lean back, if you will, because they're like, well, we're just not sure what this means for us. And so it's great to see the different bullish personalities across companies and companies you want to be behind and support, quite frankly.
Well, I would definitely second or underscore that notion of the distributed workforce and the value of creating an opening for the person who's remote in the meeting where everybody else is in the office. And that person's voice is hard to hear. When we're all remote, you've taken on a new appreciation for what that meant for the remote person. I think we've internalized that. We at Red Hat have a very distributed workforce already, but I think it's created a level of empathy for what it means to be remote and how you get your voice heard that is valuable. And I'd like to see that continue. The other piece is much more about the human relationships. So the stress that's been put on us all is something that's created opportunity to just check in with people in a more casual way. We've done a lot of not highly sort of organized or orchestrated, but natural responses of skip level meetings and just checking in with people, even if it's just a a few minutes of how are you doing? How is it working with your family? Your personal life. That relationship development, I think, has been a great benefit to offset the challenge of not being in the same office together, where you maybe had some of those casual conversations in the hallway. Here we've incorporated those into video conferences, and I'd love to see that continue, that human connection, which is so important to building trust and building a viable business.
What are your top data and technology priorities for 2021? And maybe how have those priorities changed since last year?
Yeah, so our priorities right now is, we're big on this whole connected world and bringing stuff together, right? So we've taken a strong focus on lots of integration, bringing more and more data sets in and being able to cull out of those data sets the unique insights. And again, all day aimed at driving revenue. And so what the change that happened from last year to this year for us was really focusing on industrializing the infrastructure so that we could go after this whole connected world and be able to interpret and ingest, unstructured, structured data and be able to really drive into those unique insights. And it's all because where our focus of our company is on, obviously, like everybody else on this call, is driving more and more revenues and outpacing our competition. And so that's exactly where our priorities are all focused on, all about the customer, hyper relevance, hyper personalized, and really distilling the noise.
There's a lot of recognition of data to insights and the speed that the speed can actually add the value. The pandemic kind of helped us really make the change. I mean, the priority is to say, okay, we have the data. Can we actually get to the insights as quickly as possible? Was the recognition that it happened. So that's definitely a number one priority for us as well. There's also one thing that was recognized is, okay, we have all this data, we have all these insights, but we don't have the corresponding data literacy. So should we actually focus on actually educating our internal stakeholder community on trying to read and write and speak data? And that's another priority for the coming year for us as well.
As far as Bose goes, I've got 3 pair of headsets, the Quiet Comfort 35 wireless. I just love them.
You definitely noticed during the pandemic, that was one thing that everybody wanted, quiet time from the pets, kids, lawnmowers, everything. So yeah.
From your experience in any one of those sectors, what are the top data and technology priorities?
So I think a few common themes have cropped up. One is uncomplicating the complicated. It's not a normal to have all the bells and whistles and tools and platforms and systems and every POC to sandbox environment to full-blown enterprise scale procurements of the SaaS-based vendors that are out there, the cloud-based vendors that are out there, the on-prem vendors that are out there. And it's gotten complicated. So complicated that I compare it to a plate of noodles. You're not sure where one starts and where one ends. And so for me, I think the number one objective moving forward is just simplifying the environment, aggregating where it needs to be aggregated, and just being able to explain the business where they need to go to get the information they need. So I would say simplifying the data architecture. That is not simple right now because we just have too many bells and whistles and tools and platforms and systems. An output of simplification is just easier explanation of how to get access to things, but more importantly, increasing the adoption and the utilization of the things that have been invested in. So I think oftentimes it's very tool sourced. We have a problem, this will fix it. And that oftentimes isn't the case. I always say that if you don't have the right processes defined and if the business isn't behind you, you're just going to make bad decisions go faster if you actually include a tool. So for me, it's really around simplifying the architecture, explaining where to go and how to get what you need, increasing the adoption and utilization of the investments that have already been had. And I think with my new role, I went from being a chief data and AI officer to a chief data officer to chief data and analytics officer to now a chief analytics officer. There's been an evolution. And for me, it's data is a means to the end. And so while you've got to focus on the backend ecosystem, what's it all meant for? It's really around the analytics and the insights. It's really around what you're servicing up for the business. So my focus has gone from more of a defensive playbook or a back office sort of ecosystem to more front end of understanding the business as well as I could. I mean, I haven't been in the beauty industry, the pharma industry, the music industry, or travel and leisure for 30 years, but I know enough about cross industry where I can pick and understand. I know the financials. I know how to learn the growth strategies and growth pillars that are really driving the business's positioning in the commercial marketplace. But knowing the business, understanding what answers they need to be able to make those decisions, and then connecting it back to the dots. So that evolution of being very data focused to now being insights and analytics focused, is where the focus is going to be. And then stitching together everything behind the scenes.
What a great segue to Chris, as everybody's moving to the hybrid cloud and developers want to get, speed and velocity and have the code close to the developers. And what are your top data and technology priorities for this year?
Well, we could take that two different directions. One would be more internal. So in that context, I'd say it's just perpetual pursuit of excellence. So we're always trying to improve and refine how we leverage data to run the business. And that is actually been really exciting because we look at, from an executive leadership point of view, we're looking at dashboards all the time, but we also look at those through how they evolve. And we're asking questions. What questions can we not answer with our current data sets and the analytics that we have today? And we roll out updates on a sort of continuous process and help those become visible and then drive the business in what I think is a really meaningful way. And so what's changed? Well, only the state of the art, but that perpetual pursuit of excellence has been there all along. And that's more on the internal side. We're also a software product company, and we focus on hybrid cloud and bringing tools, including developer tools, as well as data and data science tools to our customer base, which is the enterprise. So we're reflecting everything you've just heard and the need for simplicity. So that's ease of operations. We take that all the way down to the lowest level of our platforms to make sure that platforms are easily operated independent of the underlying infrastructure, and up through the data services associated with doing data processing at scale, which is a non-trivial pursuit. And it's complicated, is that Saul was describing, and how we can simplify. That's a huge challenge for every enterprise. So from our point of view, we've been looking at the kind of data-driven, data-centric, where data is the source for events. And if you think of it from an application programming point of view, those data sources become events that trigger application logic. That's kind of the evolution, the digital transformation of a business. And oversimplified, we're really prioritizing data as the primary actor, where in the past you've really focused more on the business logic, which would be applications. There's always been data there. There's always been a database behind an application. Flipping it around and saying data is the place where you're generating insights, and it's the speed with which you can iterate and experiment to produce better and better insights that will really predict the business outcomes for any particular enterprise.
What would you say, what corporate enterprise digital transformation are you most proud of, and why?
One I'm most proud of, and it's, as you said, Dave, when I was recruited into these companies as their global CIO or CTO, they were all number one in their markets. And when you're number one in your market, there's only one direction to go. And so they took that very seriously. And so one of the things that they were facing, every one of them, was to stay number one in the market, but they were also facing the reality of IT. IT's costing me a ton of money. Am I really getting the business value? And as you know, from different sectors, IT budgets are somewhere between 5 to 6% of gross revenues down to 1%, depending on the vertical. And it really speaks to how the organization feels about IT. And what I mean by that is more that it's a cost takeout instead of seeing it as a competitive advantage. So what I've managed to do in every one of my opportunities was to take IT away from being something you scrape off your shoe and making it that competitive advantage and game changer. In every one of those companies today, that IT organization is in lockstep partnership with the business, hand in hand, solving problems. It's not a throw it over the wall and the they and the us. It's all working together. And that's why they continue to all stay number one in their markets. And I was able to make IT that competitive advantage. And just as Chris said, we only do technology for one reason, to take ones and zeros and make it into meaningful information so we can drive business value. So that's what I'm most proud of.
That is so clear. Thank you so much, Becky. A follow on to that. What areas have you seen the most value from in these technology programs in any of the sectors you've worked in?
It is a true transformation because it's changing the DNA. Because one thing about being from a technology background is we speak differently in the boardroom. We're not in there talking about classes of servers and all this kind of stuff. That has no place because the boardroom doesn't really understand that. They understand, what are you going to do to drive to my bottom line? So the thing that happens with these transformations that I've led successfully is changing and inculcating innovation into the operating fabric of the business. And so what that really speaks to is you have to keep your eye on the ball on where technology is going, but you have to have the maturity and judgment to know when to and where to and how to apply, so you can keep those companies in front of their competition and outpacing their competition and developing new products they hadn't thought about. And it doesn't matter, you know, you look at integrated financial services, IT is seen as a competitive advantage. When you look at, you know, transportation or retail or hospitality, and it's seen as something that's a necessary evil. We have to change that, but it takes the right kind of leadership to do that.
Thank you. And Phanii, over to you now as head of global data strategy and analytics at Bose. What are some of the most valuable metrics and KPIs that you've measured to create high impact, not just at Bose, but in general?
So I think one of the first challenges that I've had is to educate people about being data-driven. It varies based on the organization's maturity. I mean, there are some organizations which are very matured and everything gets measured in terms of OKRs or KPIs. But there are certain organizations where you had to start from the ground up in terms of defining what the metric really means. So some of the KPIs were obviously being in various industries and various companies. What I've noticed is everybody wants to be customer-centric. If it's a product company like Bose, then we definitely want our products to perform to the best of our capabilities. And today's world of everything being connected, to Becky's point earlier, we are trying to learn from the products as much as we can and understand the consumer behavior, understand what's the consumer journey been and how can they be integrated together, and eventually try to get the best out of in terms of the product. At the same time, how can we really use metrics to really drive our operational efficiency? That's been definitely the key focus area. The best metric to be measured is employee engagement scores, especially in these times of pandemic. We want to make sure the employees are engaged. So the employee engagement score is highly critical to make sure that we are having the team motivated. There's no demoralization of spirits. We want to keep everybody engaged within the environment that we have. And on the offensive side, like I mentioned, we definitely want to learn more about the customers. We want to learn more about the products and identify the corresponding KPIs or metrics to really track and influence them. Connecting all of these, one thing that I would want to call out is how are we are actually shifting from mindset of capturing the data and building those dashboards to really identifying the impact. Yeah. One of the key measures is what is the value that you're creating. So it could be a customer value, it could be a product value that we're providing, but what exactly is the value? That becomes the really key metric, because we are all collecting data as big organizations and we're all trying to really mine the data and create those insights. But from the insights, are we really getting the outcome that we're expecting? Are we able to create the impact within that customer who's using our products? Are we really creating the impact on the product that we're actually shipping out the door?
How have, pick your sector, retail, cosmetics, pharma, music, travel sectors, and most importantly, human behavior changed over the past year, and what challenges has that presented to you?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
You know, I always say it doesn't matter what title you're given. If part of your remit of responsibility is just to deal with the data, right? Just to get the analytics organized. I always say you need a backbone in this position and not a wishbone.
Yes.
And it's true, because one is a thankless position. Everyone knows when something's broken and not working, and you're the first to be called. But when things are working, it's just expected. Well, that's how it should have always been. So now you're just doing your job. There's that element and facet to it. But companies are really leaning in. And it's interesting because I always wondered, how on earth did companies, especially the ones that I've been blessed and honored to work for, and others that my comrades here have worked for, is like, they didn't get to be this big just based on intuition. Right. They've been looking at data and analytics all this time, but you combine what they know, experience, intuition, exposure, with data and analytics to be able to grow the businesses to where they are right now. Sometimes there's luck involved, sometimes there's timing involved, but they've been looking at the information. You know, financial reporting, demand planning, these things aren't new concepts. They've existed. I think, though, the biggest surprise every time I step into a new role, and I think you guys can all speak for it as well, is how everything is being managed on Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints. And they've yet grown this large based on Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints. There's nothing wrong with it. It's been working for them. But I think the pivot that needs to occur, every company also has aspirations of growing, whether it's capturing more market share, whether it's growing the top line growth, where it's sustaining the market share that they do have, because the barrier to entry in that particular industry is just really low. At the end of the day, there's aspirations to grow and scale with an element of speed so that your typical Blockbusters and Blackberries don't happen to them. Yeah. But to do that, you can't build practices on Excel spreadsheets anymore. And I think the tough conversation has to happen is, we may not be a process-oriented company, or I know this is how we've done things in the past. And as an outsider in, your job is never to call someone else's baby ugly. That's not the case, because they are very successful companies. Yeah. But you've got to use human science and social science to let them know that we can't scale and align with our aspirations if we continually use headcount to shuffle Excel spreadsheets to provide the insights that we need that's going to help us get to that next level. One of the biggest challenges is they all have views of we need to invest in data and analytics, but what that actually means is so different across everyone. My running joke is I'll interview with 100 folks and ask them what they think my role is, and I'll get 300 different answers. So it's aligning on what that vision really is, and no two problems and no two solutions are the same. Two, using human science and social science, saying that you've done remarkably well. There's no doubt, but we've managed things on Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint. There's an element to scale at this time. We are at that pivotal moment. We don't need to do everything, but let's pick and choose the areas that matter and get out of Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints and help us scale with an element of speed so that we don't miss out on opportunities. Third is, it doesn't matter what your role's been or what you know how to do, what you've done in the past, some of it can carry over to where you are. It's a brand new puzzle and you're putting the pieces together from scratch. So you've got to be able to pivot. You may like doing something a lot because you've done it in past roles, and there may be things that you don't like doing, but it comes with the job. And in your new role, you may have to do more of the things you don't like doing and less of the things you like doing. And you got to ebb and flow and be okay with it. And so I think unanimously, those are just the three challenges that I think every company is facing is what does it mean for them? How do we scale when that's not how we know how to do? Like we're used to Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and then just making sure you're flexible and no two solutions are going to be the same.
Boy, Sol, everybody's shaking their heads. It's like the bobblehead segment, you know, we all feel your pain. We all completely.
I wish I was inventing this stuff. I'm not.
And of course, you couldn't ask for a better segue than to Chris. This wasn't a paid promotion. This is, you know, like talk about speed and developer velocity, getting the developers where the code is and making sure it's all governance protected. And you go back to the origin and the source, Red Hat. We all think a hybrid cloud. So Chris, maybe if you want to comment on that. I did have a separate question, but Sol replied so well. My question for you, Chris, was how can CTOs and CDOs increase developer velocity and speed and reduce risk by using platforms and joining the hybrid cloud? But feel free to answer any of Sol's points.
Sol couldn't have set it up better. You're absolutely right, Dave. Like that's a perfect segue into tools and thinking about the problem domain. Seeing the same issue, spreadsheets. It's actually, is it amazing or is it frightening what you can do with functions in an Excel spreadsheet? I'll digress for a moment and bring it back to data. The notion that we can scale any process without some form of automation, I think has been well challenged and well understood in the enterprise application space. So we really know what it means to run applications at scale. And we've got whole movements, you've got DevOps, which still may be buzzword-ish, but it's not a new concept at all anymore. And it's really about cross-functional teams and automation and bringing high velocity to the application space. All of those lessons learned are applicable in the data science space. And the way I like to think of it is we understand source code. We understand revisioning and releases and continuous integration and continuous deployment for applications. So you've got source, you've got a binary artifact, you've got a development and a testing and a production environment. We have ways to measure the results of applications. When you think of data as source and you think of a model as a binary artifact and training a model and parameter tuning to improve the efficacy of the model, ultimately that model is only valuable if it's put into some kind of a production role. So you're bringing insights back into the business. The time that it takes to start with data and produce a model is directly related to the tools and the automation that you have available to your data scientists. So we've been focused on shrinking that time so that you can turn the crank more rapidly. And it's all about iteration. There's a lot of great insights in the data science space. And one is the amount of data that you have is really directly related to the quality of the models. But it's also about understanding what subset of the data are you using to train and how representative is that subset. And are you doing things that we do in application development, like A/B testing, to give different results and information back from the data science and the models that we're developing? You could call that model ops to keep the buzz phrases rolling. And so model ops, I think, is the space that we've been really focused on, bringing that DevOps discipline to model development and data scientists. And if you think about the tool sets, which themselves are rapidly evolving, giving tools pre-packaged to data scientists so that they're not spending their time building and maintaining tool sets, it's a huge velocity boost. And then if you think about those 2,500 enterprise applications that make up any enterprise, it's, if not already, very soon now, those 2,500 applications will be backed by models. So now you have 2,500 models, you've got model sprawl and model complexity, and you need to manage all of that with automation to remove the error rates of human intervention. And I think this is really important. If you look at those 2,500 models and the hours required to produce a model, it doesn't take long to shrink the time frame down to make a real meaningful impact. So we looked at customer impact. Usually we could reduce time to deployments by kind of in the realm of 80 to 90%. And if you're talking about thousands and thousands of hours, that maps to a couple of years of people's time. That's years of time that could be focused on improving the insights from the models, not maintaining tools and pulling data off of spreadsheets and manually processing data. I mean, those are just not ways to scale a business. So couldn't have been a better setup. Love the visual of how we're going to scale around a spreadsheet. And it's exactly the area that we've been focused on. And when you think about hybrid cloud and the fact that some of this data comes from the real world, which talks about edge compute and the ability to train at scale and then deploy models and inference in different parts of your business, that is kind of the definition of a hybrid environment. So we've been really focused on this space. And, I see it really coming to life over the last year, and as we progress forward, it's a key focus area.
Sure is. Thank you so much. And obviously IBM's acquisition of Red Hat looking better and better. For those who don't know, but October of last year, IBM announced that they're spinning off a new co, which is their services group. It's about a third of the organization. And IBM itself is going to be focused on data, AI, quantum, and hybrid cloud. It's a core focus for the business going forward. So congratulations to you, Chris, and everybody at Red Hat. Thanks for all that you do. Let's leave the platforms aside and go to the human factor.
To really build that relationship, what I would see is all three areas, they cannot be mutually exclusive. The challenge is it's been each of these leaders or each of these areas go so much deep into their vertical that they tend to forget the fact that they can be mutually exclusive or they can be successful without the others.
Exactly.
So the advice that I would actually want to give is keep reminding yourself that, hey, we'll have to be great at partnering each other. If not, all of us would fail. Eventually, it comes down to the personalities, it comes down to the challenges that they're dealing with, or sometimes they're so focused heads down to meet their own requirements within their organizations. So it tends to get the basic foundation of it's all connected together thought just gets drifted away. As a data leader, what my role I see is critical to be is, I know I've heard somebody in prior sessions of these say that data leaders are the purple persons, and we try to be acting as a midpoint between digital and technology. And I try to play that role with one, to let the fact know that it's all connected. The other is let's support each other to be really successful. The third advice that I would give is, okay, do we really understand where we are? I mean, everybody has aspirations. We all definitely want to get ourselves up to the moon and back, but do we have the ground reality in place? Aspirations are really good. I am a strong believer that every organization should have a North Star in place for them to be at least thinking through on what their final goal is, but eventually understanding the ground reality is kind of key. Again, Sol mentioned about people having everything in the world. I mean, it's everything in the kitchen sink. We all have all kinds of technologies, all kinds of tools, all kinds of databases, just because they are the buzzwords and they are the key technology providers. And I would say give credits to all the salespeople out there, pre-sales and the salespeople out there. They're doing a fantastic job in selling those tools and capabilities. And we are seeing as technologists, as data people, we are seeing the responses of that with siloed data teams, siloed IT shops out there. So as data leaders, what I would consider myself, one of the main challenges is to keep the reality and set the expectations within my peer community, continuously bring them to the fact that there's always partnership that is required for each of us to be highly successful.
What advice would you give to your peers on the call who are looking to optimize the relationships between these three main groups: digital transformation, data-driven culture, and technology?
Patience, lots of patience and alignment. And then when you think you're done, more patience and alignment. And then when you're totally tapped out, more patience and alignment. It's just gotten really complicated, right? I think if you took a look at organizations in the world 30 years ago, there was classic IT and business. It was fairly simple. The line in the sand was fairly clean. But I think with the evolution of everything that's come around, and to quote a phenomenal and old CEO of mine, the pace of change is as slow as it's ever going to be. And with that pace of change has come all sorts of disciplines that cross over between business and technical. DNA is not one or the other. It's the Venn diagram in between. Digital is not one or the other. It's the Venn diagram in between. And sometimes in organizations, they're still operating based on the classic way of the operating model of business or IT. But the fact of the matter is that the world has evolved. There is no divide. We are all part of the same world. It's just that we've chosen to be masters of certain disciplines instead of a jack of all trades. And so I think in this new age, in this coming world, whether it's a new position, an existing position, you're going to have to go through those awkward discussions around alignment and roles and responsibilities and clarity. And I'm just, the topic is there's more than enough work to go around. So let's not be worried about that. 2, there is no such thing as, well, we are tech, we are IT, this is what we do, or we are business, this is what we do. We all have responsibilities to each other now, because guess what? It's really aggressive out there, and we've got to be masters of our craft and come together to figure this out collectively. So my word of advice is over align and be very patient in the path, because people don't remember what you say. People don't remember what happened in a meeting, but they'll always remember how you made them feel and whether or not they were inclusive in the process or they weren't. And so that alignment and that patience is so needed as businesses are trying to figure out how these Venn diagrams come together.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Sol. And Chris, over to you. How are you optimizing the relationship between digital data and tech?
I would be disingenuous to say, as a technologist, that I don't lead with a technology persuasion. I do have a strong view that technology is an important part of the puzzle, but it would be equally disingenuous to say technology is the solution. It is just a part of the solution. And if I'm honest, it's the smaller part, and the bigger part is the people and the process. It's no words of wisdom or insight. I think we collectively have understood that and really been focusing on how do we bring people and process together. So couldn't agree more with that over alignment or alignment kind of notion, clarity of roles and responsibilities. And specifically, I think there's real opportunity from the tools point of view, creating a common platform. That's just plain old efficiency. There is also an opportunity to ensure that each of the different data focused teams are aligned with the business and focused on some shared KPIs. If you're not producing insights that are valuable to the business, you're not being valuable to the business. Sharing that information, having a shared set of KPIs or some metrics that you're measuring together, I think is a critical part of the picture, because from a technology point of view or a data science point of view, the things that you might get excited about could start to get esoteric and produce diminishing returns. So it's about creating trust for the business, that you're producing valuable results. And some of that trust goes all the way to governance and reproducibility. So it's a more of a technical statement of trust. Some of that's at the business level. And if you can't really trust the results of the analytics that you're getting to make good decisions for your business, then you're just going to go back to what you understand, and you'll go back to your spreadsheets, and then we're not actually going forward at all. We're being distracted by shiny tools and cool experiments that aren't creating impact for the business. So I think it's that shared view, bringing the technology, the people, the process, the business, the KPIs, the data science together. And in my world, open source is a big part of it. So it's about collaboration. And I think that collaboration and openness and transparency gives real opportunity, so that one line of business doesn't have to recreate the work that another line of business is doing, because typically enterprises are large and complex themselves. So that's kind of how I view it.
What a great session. Remember to all of you out there to send your questions via chat so that our guests can answer them during the live Q&A, which starts right now. Fantastic. What a great session. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for joining us. Thanks to all of you, we just set yet another record for attendee registration. So we're delighted that you all had a chance to join us, and want to thank most of all our special guest speakers, Tim and Inderpal, Sol, Becky, and Phanii and Chris, Wright, and looking forward to opening it up to live Q&A. Also want to say thanks to everybody in the chat. You know, I see Jay Sankar is getting some great conversation going. And also Chan Su sent in a great question. Those of you back from the old school might remember Chan. He was the founder of agency.com, probably the first interactive agency back in the mid-90s. And he asked a great question, which is, are we still going to use the term digital transformation, you know, now that it's all the way down to the last mile? But I see you've all joined us. So I want to set any surprise questions on you. So we're going to go in order again. We'll start with Becky if you want to unmute or get prepared. So Becky, thanks for joining us again. Really appreciate it. Would wonder, what's your advice for collaborating and engaging with your C-suite peers to drive enterprise strategy and business value?
When you look at our job as the senior IT executive, CIO, and member of the executive leadership team, it's twofold, right? One, it's obviously to, partner with the business to continue to drive their competitive advantage. But the second piece is, to stay abreast of where technology is, know where it's headed, and be able to proactively implement it. So again, to extend the competitive advantage for the company. And so when you think about Kant, the notion of the continuing challenge for us is always to keep the trains running, which is the dial tone of the company. And when you think about the ability to deliver new capabilities, new sophistication to advance that business's competitive advance, that's the lifeblood. So the balance, can't, no, business prevention aren't options. And so my advice is you've got to really, engage with your peers and partners like we've talked about on this call today, but it's really to get to the bottom of what the real problems are, and then understand where the company needs to head, and then marry your knowledge of the technology and the where it needs to go, and make it scalable, viable, and repeatable and solvable ahead of your competition. So you've got to always be playing that dual role and be able to really do what you say you're going to do, and do it always. Because at the end of the day, you're measured by your ability to advance to the business. And so that's the advice I would give, is understand fully what the problem is, solve it with the business, and leverage technology to position for the future. That's my advice.
Great advice, Becky. And congratulations again on your new role as CEO at AlertNest.
Thank you.
You bet. Sol, boy, you had some of the tougher questions today, and you certainly answered them really well. We're going to give you a little bit of an easier one this time, but what culture change do you suggest for companies that want to fully embrace the power of analytics and AI?
My first would be, and this is the hardest, and I'm not saying many companies are good, is remove the division of labor. This goes back to an earlier comment of historically two divides, business or not. And the not is finance, legal, technology, and all the other corporate functions, if you will. But the world of data and analytics and AI is just an amalgamation of everything, right? It's that Venn diagram in the middle of understanding the outcomes, the business problems, the capabilities that exist out there, the potential solutions, POCs of how to potentially address the business problems, solution architecture, deployments, delivery, et cetera. And so that pendulum swings from left to right, and it's not black or white. It's like 50 shades of gray. And so to be able to actually get to that end state or end goal where everyone talks about leveraging AI or data and analytics for new insights, it's you got to start removing the division of labor. It's not the business is responsible for this and IT is responsible for this. There are individuals who have legitimately studied this stuff or have made entire careers around data and analytics. AI is relatively new-ish, but there are a few old school folks where we didn't call it AI back in the day. We called it engineering, or we called it neural networks, or we called it cognitive computing or cognitive science. A few of us dorks have been in this space for quite some time. And so it doesn't feel good when folks are saying, well, that's your swim lane and this is my swim lane. Everything that we hope to achieve from data and analytics can't be achieved with that's your swim lane and this is my swim lane. And it can't be leveraged with the divisions of labor that exist. So I would say that first and foremost, when it comes to cultural changes, remove those barriers, You won't remove the politics, but remove the barriers around division of labor so that people can start working together and really appreciate and identify the mechanics versus the mechanical engineers, the electricians from the electrical engineers. Not everyone's meant to do everything. Know who the experts are, bring them in for masters of their craft, and have them work across the organization without those divisions of labor. And then you'll start moving the needle.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again, Sol, and congratulations to you too as a new CAO at the Estée Lauder company. They're so lucky to have you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You bet. Over to Chris. Chris, we had a question while you're unmuting. We had a question from the audience, from Russ Dowru. And as I may have mentioned at the beginning, we had dozens of questions from the audience. And folks, we really appreciate when you send those in. So shout out to Russ. Chris, how do you balance a CIO or a CTO's cloud journey to show IT cost savings versus the CDO's need for data innovation?
Well, it's definitely it's a great question. It's a good balance to look for and strive for. I wouldn't equate them, and I think there's a relationship between the two. The CIO focus on basically operational expense reduction is, I think, in large part, there's a lot of opportunity in the IT space directly, meaning an enterprise, as I was mentioning earlier, has sort of this 2,500 application, basically a random number, but the idea is that that's the rough order of scale. There's a ton of opportunity in standardization, consolidation, and building best practices around moving applications into the cloud so that you don't chew up cloud resources when you're not requiring the application to run, or sort of I'll call it the low-hanging fruit. So there's real opportunities in just saving costs within IT. To me, those actually become mechanisms for investing in the innovation side of the business. And data is a great example of how we need to invest appropriately. And there it's about efficient investments. And so some of the things I was talking about earlier in terms of thinking about what is the right platform that you can roll out that's effective for a broad set of data scientists, so that you're building that same operational efficiency that we want to see on the IT side, on the data science side. And then there's some great questions around hybrid and where can you do the most efficient scale out training, and where do you have to do the actual say model deployment. So that's an opportunity to just look at cost and benefit. But I really, my view is where there's cost savings in IT, those can be applied to innovation functions in the company, and data is a key part of that. It's easy to do scale out training and chew up a ton of cloud resources. And so being thoughtful about how you build the right platforms and where you're looking at those KPIs and the parameter tuning and model refinement that's gone past producing business value, and now it's just an expense in the cloud. To me, those are the balances that you look for.
Absolutely. Great answers. And thanks so much for your content today, Chris. You've got a lot of fans in the chat room. I don't know if you have a chance to see in that, but a couple of people are giving you shout outs for your conversation today. So thanks to all at Red Hat for everything you guys do, guys and gals. Great. Inderpal. Wow. Thanks again, Inderpal, for our opening session. It was fantastic. And my question to you is actually not from me. It's from Rose Mead Hart, who's a longtime listener, first-time caller. This is her first session asking a question, which is, actually, she asked a question last time too, but she wants us to kind of isolate the core essence of this, which is, what's the best way for a company to serve their customers with data?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. It's, I think, I tend to think of it along 3 dimensions. I mean, the first one is listen, because you need to really surface what the customer is actually after. And in the data space, if you're active in the data space, it usually breaks down around 3 larger dimensions. They could be after revenue, they could be after efficiency, they could be after risk reduction. And you've got to know which one they're on. So if they're on revenue and you're talking about efficiency, you're going to lose them, right? I mean, so I think that's one. I also think that there's also so much confusion around other major initiatives that people come up with. So they might be talking AI, but the problem might really be in the data preparation in the information architecture, right? All the stuff you need to do before you get to AI. So again, I mean, it's determining their intent. So you can only do that by listening, right? So just to second all the points that were made by the panel around patience, alignment, all that stuff. So you've got to listen. I think the next piece that I am high on is show them what you can do as opposed to just telling them what you can do, actually demonstrate it to them, because that also goes to the clarity in terms of surfacing what they want. Customers are not going to tell you they need an automobile. They'll tell you they want a faster horse and carriage. So, I mean, that whole aspect of co-creating with them and so forth, I think becomes extremely important. So would be
Definitely.
the second aspect of that. And finally, I'd say meet them where they are. Very often, especially if you're a large company like we are, and you have lots of solutions, lots of different ways to do things, there's a temptation to impose more than actually meeting the customer exactly where they are. So, if people are working and they've invested heavily in one platform, they'll also have invested heavily in the ecosystems around those platforms. So you kind of have to partner with that ecosystem, with that platform that they're on, and then bring the value that you have to offer, and meet them where they're at. So I think those are the three primary ways that I'd go about it.
That's great advice. And if you want to hang on, Inderpal, maybe I'll go to the next question to you. Those of you who may have noticed, Phanii Pydimarri, who's the global head of data strategy and analytics at Bose, had a conflict and couldn't make the live Q&A, but we had a question teed up for him from the audience as well. And maybe since we have 4 minutes, anybody want to jump in on it? Maybe I know, Inderpal, you probably got a great answer to this one, but Phani's question was going to be, what does it take to attract and retain top technical talent today?
I do have a thought, but I'll defer to the panel. I'll come back and pipe in.
Sure. Chris, you want to tackle that one? The question is, what does it take, since Red Hat's got so many technical people, what does it take to attract and retain top technical talent today?
First and foremost, it is not easy. It's a very competitive landscape, and the technical talent, the top talent, is highly sought after by large, well-funded organizations. So it is not easy. I think a couple of key areas. One, really focusing your attention on what you're best at. So you're attracting the talent that's going to really support the goals that you have. So as an example, the difference between building your own platform versus building on top of a platform. Great question to have, in a debate to have internally. Make that decision and be clear on what that is, and then attract the talent that's relevant to the right side of that equation. There's a lot happening in open source, so looking into the open source communities for great places to find talent is it's a good source of talent, but also enabling your talent to engage with those communities, which gives them a sense of invigoration, engagement, learning, stretching, also really important. So it's not easy. Picking the right tools, picking the right focus areas, and giving people the flexibility to really flex their muscles, I think, is important.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to jump in on that? We have 2 minutes left. I've got about a 1 minute wrap up, but does anyone have a thought, or should we wrap up?
I want to add on to what Chris said, and my view on it is that it's about respect, and it's about keeping the talent challenged and giving them a safe harbor way to allow them to expand. I mean, one thing as a leader is our job is to remove the obstacles, right? But what you find with a lot of talent is they want to continue, they're lifetime learners, they want to continue to grow. So you've got to give them the environment to enable them to be success and stretch themselves, but protect them so they don't blow up your business. And I think that respect and that trust and that confidence that you instill in them is what keeps them bringing their whole self to you every single day. And that's what you're going for.
Absolutely. And as you all indicated earlier in the session, with the hybrid environment that we're working in, and due to the pandemic, it's a lot. We've all been used to working with the remote developers and remote application designers, et cetera. But that ability to have people work not necessarily in your local area has just exploded, obviously, over the past year as well. So great. Well, wrapping it up, thanks again to our special guest. But really, I want to thank mostly all of you. As I said, we set a record for viewers once again every time with these events. So we're just delighted. But I want to thank you also, every one of you, for the incredible work that you're doing and your incredible leadership during these turbulent times. They're just unprecedented. So congrats and kudos to you and your teams. And speaking of which, be sure to tune in next time for the June IBM CDO CTO Summit on June 16th, where we're going to be exploring how to get students, fans, customers, and employees back into the building. And I think that's top of everybody's mind right now. So check out cdoclub.com for more information or to register. And until then, please stay safe and healthy, and I hope to see you all in June. Thanks again, everybody.